Water wars. The idea seems so far-fetched, fantastical, and somewhat melodramatic. It immediately evokes a detached perception of a world far, far away that exists only in our imaginations. Water-related stresses in countries around the world are increasingly leading to civil conflict. The relentless use of water as an everlasting resource means water inevitably remains undervalued in society, and at present South Africa may have no choice but to prepare for the worst as it sits on our doorstep. The drought in sub-Saharan Africa is far from far away, and yet recent revelations by South Africa's Water and Sanitation Minister Nomvula Mokonyane paints a picture of a country that is yet to realize and internalize the true extent of this country and the continent's national disaster.
On the 12th of August 2016, the Department of Water and Sanitation gazetted the implementation of the water restrictions for the integrated Vaal River system. This is a system that largely affects water users for our province, Gauteng, where we are today. These restrictions included the 15% reduction of consumption by domestic users and 20% reduction for irrigation users. These restrictions intended to give us an opportunity to manage our water supplies, as well as to give us space to stretch available resources to ensure sustainable supply. The Vaal River system is currently at an average dam level of 51.8%. This is the total average of the 14 dams that supply the Vaal River system. The Vaal Dam in particular is currently at a 30.1 capacity and has been losing water at a rate of 0.8% week on week. The Department of Water and Sanitation has been monitoring the system, and the monitoring indicates that we may reach a level of 25% by the 14th of November 2016. Should we fail to see a reduction in water use as well as in the consumption of water in Gauteng. This will trigger the next level of interventions to be implemented. As of the 6th of September, when municipalities began to implement the 15% restrictions, we have seen a reduction of below 5% by September 2016. However, there's also now been a decline to 2.7, quite far from the 15% target by the 3rd of October 2016. This shows that instead of water demand and usage decreasing in Gauteng, there is in fact an increase by consumers on water use. If one looks at water use nationally, 62% of our national water resources are utilized by agriculture and 23% by urban domestic water use, 4% by rural consumers and 2% by power generation. However, in our province here in Gauteng, the pattern is different. 79% of the water is utilized for domestic urban use, 6% for agriculture and 5% for power generation and 9% for mining and other industrial activities. To succeed in saving water in the Gauteng area, the active participation and responses by households, particularly domestic users, as the major water users is of critical importance. Behavioral change by the Gauteng domestic water users are urgently needed. A continued ignorance of the need to reduce water use will inevitably lead to a collapse in the entire Vaal River system, which would have dire financial and socio-economic consequences. With 45% of the economy and 35% of the population resident here in Gauteng, it is therefore important for us to ensure that we save the system and mobilize citizens to heed the call to use less water and to use the less we have in a much more responsible manner. It can be business as usual for both government as well as the end user, the consumer. And again, we appeal to our citizens that we cannot continue to lose 40% of drinkable water to non-human consumption purposes such as gardening and recreational activities. And one of those in Gauteng are your golf estates, the cleaning of our yards, as well as the beautification of our surroundings. It may also be important to note that implementation of restrictions does not include supply of water to Eskom for purposes of power generation, because we do also need this power for us to continue pumping water to the end user. This exclusion is deliberate in order to minimize the casual effect that would arise on other basic and necessary services, including health services. The meeting today, chaired by myself and MEC Paul Mashatile, was as such an opportunity to have our municipalities, the province and ourselves agreeing on what is to be done to reduce consumption, enforce restrictions, and manage the system to minimize disruptions whilst mobilizing consumers to reduce consumption. There are municipalities that have shown a significant reduction in water consumption towards the 15% required. However, for measurable impact to be achieved, a wholesale reduction is required by consumers across the board. We've also agreed that municipalities must do more work to recover a portion of the unaccounted for water that is lost through the leaks and water wasting infrastructure. If one looks at the city of Joburg to make the point, 35%.
The true wrath of the country's drought conditions began to rear a larger part of its ugly head when water shortages gripped the well-serviced urban dwellers of Gauteng recently. Heat waves further added to the rapid evaporation of sub-Saharan Africa's new gold. Gauteng, Limpopo and Mpumalanga and the northwest are worst hit, and in Gauteng, the city of Ekurhuleni and the south of Johannesburg are seeing taps run dry. This while dam levels dropped at an alarming rate, and recent data showing that urban residents are running taps with no restraint. The Water and Sanitation Department has announced stricter water restrictions, citing gross water wastage in metros like Johannesburg, Tshwane and Ekurhuleni. Reservoirs are running dry across the big metros and water tankers have been scarce. The effects on local economies in the long run are unimaginable. A large amount of urban water use goes to non-consumative use such as pools and gardening in South Africa. In Gauteng, beautification takes up an even higher percentage of water use, making up part of 40% that goes to non-consumative uses. The gap between supply and demand for water is expected to reach 17% by 2030. Even if the agricultural outlook improves this year, the UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs says it will take 2 years for drought-stricken communities to recover from El Niño's impact. Jobs in the agricultural sector were cut by 5% compared to the previous quarter and in the same period last year in South Africa. According to StatSA, 37,000 farmers have been laid off in the last year. The Vaal Dam has lost around 1% of water weekly, forcing government to tap into water from the Sterkfontein reserves. The Department of Water Affairs 2010 position statement on the Vaal River system and acid mine drainage states that the Vaal River system meets the water resource needs of 60% of the national economy and serves 20 million people, approximately 45% of South Africa's population in the country. With food prices soaring and water access becoming increasingly less, South Africa is faced with one scary question: what will you do with your last drop?